Republicans only love rich people. I saw a bumper sticker the other day. In fact, the truth is I haven't actually seen it for about a month or so, since school let out for the summer. But when school is in, I drive my son to school every day. And every day I see a vehicle parked out in the lot with a very special bumper sticker. It reads something like this: Republicans only love rich people. Democrats love everyone. Vote Democrat. Now, that's a paraphrase, but it's a pretty close one. And for just a few moments, I'd like to point out some of the obvious logical flaws in that statement. And then I'd like to ask you a question. First up for discussion, Republicans only love rich people. Now, for the sake of full disclosure, I should be careful to state that I've voted Republican all of my life, although in recent years I have begun to wonder just how much difference there is between the two parties, outside of a few notable exceptions. But that's another video entirely. The point I'd like to make here is the purely illogical nature of such a statement, and the divisiveness that it encourages between the citizens of this country. Statistically speaking, the percentage of people who label themselves Republican or Democrat in this country is dead even. As of June 2012, 35.4% of U.S. citizens consider themselves Republicans, while 34.0% would label themselves as Democrats. That's a statistical dead heat in my mind, leaving about 30% of the nation basically unaffiliated with either party. Now, it seems, at least recently, that the benchmark being used by the Democratic Party to establish whether someone is rich or not is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $200,000 to $250,000 a year. Some obviously may have different opinions of where this magic dividing line exists, but let's stick with that number for now, just for the sake of discussion. So, what percentage of Americans are actually rich by that definition? Well, according to IRS government statistics from 2009, less than 3% of the tax returns submitted in this country reflected an income of over $200,000. Less than 3%. Of course, we could discuss the fairness of this statistic, or how fair it is for so few people to be rich while the rest of us are not, but it would be relatively irrelevant to this particular discussion. The only thing relevant to this discussion is at least 32.4% of self-proclaimed Republicans in this country are not rich. They're earning less than $200,000 a year. That's simply the math. The numbers don't lie. If 35.4% of Americans are Republicans and only 3% of Americans are rich, well, simple subtraction tells us that 32.4% of Republicans are not rich. In fact, since we know that not all of the rich people in this country are Republicans, it's actually pretty safe to say that the percentage of rich Republicans is even less than 3%. Thus, the number of not rich Republicans would be even more than 32.4%. But it really doesn't matter. My point is only that if 32.4% of Republicans are not rich, then claiming that Republicans only care about the rich people makes absolutely no sense. That would mean that 32.4% of Americans don't care about themselves, their family, or their friends. The vast majority of whom are likely not rich. I earn nowhere near $200,000, and I can easily count on one hand with a couple of fingers to spare the number of families that I know who do earn that kind of money. But I, and many of those that I know well, would classify themselves as Republicans. I care about all of them. They're important to me. I care about their well-being. In fact, whether they're rich or poor, white or black, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, Christian or not, I care what happens to them. I want them to succeed. I want them to be happy. The very premise is completely ridiculous. Since over 90% of self-proclaimed Republicans are not rich, suggesting that they only care about rich people makes no sense. And yet I constantly hear Democrats spouting that nonsense to anyone who will listen. and putting their clever slogan on bumper stickers and billboards and banners and, well, you name it. And what about the rest of it? What about the Democrats love everybody portion? Well, in order for this statement to be true, you have to consider Republicans and rich people, well, basically nobody. I mean, seriously, the way that many, maybe most isn't the correct term, but it's certainly many Democrats demonize Republicans and rich people, it cannot possibly be said with a straight face that they love them, unless you don't actually consider them to be people. Democrats as a party clearly do not love everybody, or they would not verbally assault conservatives, Republicans, and rich people on such a regular basis. And lest I seem like a complete hypocrite, let's not leave out the conservatives and the Republicans. We're often guilty of the very same thing. I've read some really nasty articles, blogs, comments, and whatnot that are being spewed by some conservatives and Republicans who think that Democrats and liberals as a whole are either demons or idiots. Neither is necessarily true. The fact is, it matters little who's doing it or who is doing it more or less. The fact is, it's happening, and it shouldn't, and it doesn't have to. There is common ground where we can come together. Freedom is that common ground. It's the common ground that was shared by citizens of this nation for many, many years after its founding. It's what made us a great and prosperous nation. There will always be differences of opinion, but that is what makes this nation great. We all can come together under the banner of freedom and yet be individualized in our beliefs, and come together in cities and regions with like-minded Americans to live as we please. It's actually one great big experiment. Some regions will prosper while other regions in the U.S. may flounder, at least temporarily. But the beauty is, as human beings, we can intelligently observe what regions, states, or cities are the most prosperous and the most peaceful, and use them as a model for our own cities or states or regions. But we must be a free nation in order for that to work, because if we are free as a nation to make choices and experiment with our notions about life, we will then be free to make changes when it doesn't work, or we will be free to move to another state or city where they seem to have figured it out. We must respect other people. We must respect their right to believe differently than we do and to live their lives differently than we do. We must respect others' right to tell us if they think we're doing it wrong, and they should respect our right to ignore them or disagree if they haven't convinced us. We should not try to silence them. We should not use the government to shut them down or the media to demonize and malign them. We should not use government rules, regulations, and taxes to force others to think and behave as we do simply because we think we're right and they're wrong. And we should stop voting for those who say that they will. Quit voting for politicians who keep promising to assess more laws, more regulations, and more taxes whose only logical outcome is to modify human behavior. If you touch a hot stove and you get burned, you won't touch it again. If any behavior is taxed, regulated, or legislated against, you will see less of it. It's only natural. And that's great when it's not your behavior that's being regulated against. But what happens when it's your behaviors that the state is attempting to modify through rules and regulations and taxes? How do you feel about it then? Well, you want to vote them out and vote other people in who will regulate other people's behaviors, not yours. For instance, I hate smoking. I despise it. The smell, the way it dries out my throat, everything about it makes me ill. My state recently passed a law banning smoking in certain businesses. Well, that's great for me, but not so great for smokers or for businesses whose clientele is primarily individuals who smoke. They lose money. Smoking behavior has been effectively modified. Non-smokers love it. Smokers and businesses that serve them hate it. Well, who's right? Why should one person be allowed to control another's behavior simply because they voted the right men or women into office? The real result is division. Now, smokers and non-smokers become political enemies, voting for the politician who'll lean their direction. Take virtually any law on the books, and a similar situation is created. More political enemies, the people who want the law versus the people who don't. So here's the question I have for you. What exactly does it all accomplish? We are divided into smokers and non-smokers, liberals and conservatives, environmentalists and non-environmentalists, Republicans and Democrats, and so on and so on and so on. Put simply, it divides all of us so that we remain weak. There is strength in numbers. If the government and the politicians can keep us convinced that we are enemies, fighting and bickering with each other to wield the government hammer against the people who don't agree with us, they maintain control, and we don't even realize that we're helping them do it. Quit fighting each other to elect more control. Start working together to increase freedom for everyone in this country, not just you, but also the people who disagree with you. Quit slandering and maligning each other for political gain and start shooting for the same target: freedom. Equal freedom for everybody.